when we are doing a procedure, we have to be focused on it, right? I mean, it doesn't really matter, if you are loving your job, or, there's fighting at home, or, the traffic was bad, or, you're not happy with what's going on where you are politically. You're unhappy with global sort of issues. None of that matters, right? I mean, when you are with a patient doing a procedure, you have to be focused on doing that. And I think that's a good exercise. There's no choice, right? We have to do it for the sake of the patient. It's just what's right and fair to them. But I think there's something to be said for bringing that type of laser-like focus into other aspects of life as well.
When saving lives is what you do, your standards are anything but standard. In fact, you set them higher than most to deliver results that patients can depend on. You refuse to compromise. We couldn't agree more. We are Edwards Life Sciences, and like you, we believe that good is never good enough. Rising to the challenge of today's TAVR patients isn't just a mission, it's a commitment. And because you set a higher standard, we set our sights on meeting you there. Welcome to the higher standard, your standard. Learn more at edwardstavr.com.
You're listening to Parallax from Radcliffe Cardiology in association with makeadent.org. Here is your host, Ankur Kalra, MD from the Cleveland Clinic.
Hello, everyone. Welcome again to an extremely special episode of Parallax. Parallax was started in 2019. And, when we started, little did we know that we would be recording our 50th episode. It's June 2021, and we are into our 50th episode. And when I was having a conversation with the producers of Parallax, who are Radcliffe Group Limited out of United Kingdom, we were discussing as to who should be the guest who can do justice to our 50th episode. And we could not find anyone else better to suit this pedestal. And, he obviously was extremely kind to accept my invitation, is Dr. Deepak Bhatt. Dr. Bhatt, the name needs no introduction, is a professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School and the executive director of interventional cardiovascular programs at Brigham and Women's Heart and Vascular Center and Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston, Massachusetts. So, without much further ado, Dr. Bhatt, welcome on the show, and thank you so much for doing this for us.
Well, it's really great to be here with you. A real privilege and honor.
So, Dr. Bhatt, let me begin by asking you. Obviously, we've known each other now for, I would say, a little over maybe 5-6 years, and we were just talking off the line and. Just reminiscing how I would walk over from the Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center over to Brigham and Women's Hospital to sit down with you and, go over ideas on projects. And, here we are now. But I've always looked up to you as my mentor, my teacher, my guru, someone I aspire to be, someone I emulate. I even actually emulate how you organize your email signature. I remember having sought permission from you if I could emulate that format. So, if I can only be, like 1% of Deepak Bhatt, I think I would have done justice to my career. But, the question is, how do you get the time to be omnipresent? I think that's my first question for you.
Well, thank you for the question. First of all, it really is great to have met you so many years ago. It's hard to believe how much time has passed. It's a cliche how quickly time passes, but it really does. And it is wonderful to have known you all this time and to see how successful you've been, both professionally and personally, in everything that you've been doing, including launching this whole program. Really a testimony to your innovation and energy. But in terms of being omnipresent, I don't know about that being true. I do try to focus when I'm doing things on what I'm doing, but I don't know that that's a skill necessarily specific to me. I do think it's one that people who are proceduralists often do develop in a matter of speaking, whether they're surgeons or interventional cardiologists. Where when we are doing a procedure, we have to be focused on it, right? I mean, it doesn't really matter, if you are loving your job or there's fighting at home, or the traffic was bad, or you're not happy with what's going on where you are politically. You're unhappy with the global sort of issues. None of that matters, right? I mean, when you are with a patient doing a procedure, you have to be focused on doing that. And I think that's a good exercise. There's no choice, right? We have to do it for the sake of the patient. It's just what's right and fair to them. But I think there's something to be said for bringing that type of laser-like focus into other aspects of life as well. So whatever it is you're doing, that you be as focused as you are if you're stenting a left main, if you are working on editing a paper, or if you are giving advice to someone. That is, at that moment, you've got to just think that's the only thing that's going on in the world. It's super important to the person on the other side. I mean, even if for you stenting a left main is routine, for them it's a matter of life or death. And likewise, if you're giving advice to someone who's, applying for fellowship in cardiology, might be the 100th or maybe 1,000th time you've done it, or maybe the 1st or 10th. But for that person, it's potentially a really critical juncture in their life. And, for that reason, I try to focus on things as I'm doing them. But I don't know that that's anything unique about me in any way. Though I do think there are some skills that we learn in medicine, in that case specifically from procedural medicine, that can apply to other aspects of life.
Yeah, no, excellent analogy, and I couldn't agree with you more. It's the practice of mindfulness and the practice of being here now, as they call it in the spiritual world. And no better than a surgeon or an interventional cardiologist or a proceduralist, like you said, to sort of bring that focus and attention to every action, every interaction that you have on a day-to-day basis. Just undivided attention and focus, which are crucial for success in any task that you pick up. Dr. Bhatt, I don't stalk you, but I kind of do. I was going over PubMed, and I put your name on PubMed, and I found over 1,600 peer-reviewed manuscripts, and these 1,600 are not I'm not trying to be disrespectful to some of the journals that do not have an impact factor or have an impact factor in single digits. But these are New England Journal of Medicine, Lancet, JAMA, JACC, European Heart Journal, Circulation, these kinds of papers. For someone like, for residents, for fellows, even for medical students, obviously for early career, mid-career, or even established, cardiologists or interventionalists, or, even just doctors, physicians, scientists. I mean, this is a broad question, because 1,600 manuscripts on PubMed you'd probably be a handful on the planet to have that kind of number. How do you do that? How do you do that? And, having known you personally and having worked with you for so long in several manuscripts, I think I have I hope that this number grows, but I have over 3 dozens of manuscripts with you as a co-author. And I know that you are extremely engaged and extremely responsive in editing and providing feedback, critical feedback, not just syntax, but, methodology, and you look at the numbers, and you look at the p-values, and you look at the confidence intervals, and you look at the odds ratios, hazard ratios. You're very, very involved. And this is irrespective of you being the final corresponding or somewhere in the middle or in the first 3. The order of authorship does not matter to you. As long as your name is on that paper, it is your paper. And that has been my experience of working with you. How do you do that? Like, what's the secret? What's the mantra? What's the sauce?
Well, I don't know, if there's any secret. So I guess I'd say, first of all, the goal isn't just, to publish a bunch of papers. It's sort of like, procedures. The goal is not just to do a bunch of procedures. I mean, the goal is to do really good work. And in the case of publications, work that's really impactful. And I think, the journal that it's in matters to an extent, but that's not the most important thing either. In the end, it's, does that paper in some way, improve human health? Does it help physicians provide better care? And if the answer to those questions is yes, then, it doesn't really matter to me what journal it got in. But in any circumstance, it does matter that, it's a good piece of work, that it actually is serving those larger goals. And I think that's really what, when people are publishing, they should keep in mind, does this work, have the potential to actually make an impact in some way? And if the answer is yes, it's worth pursuing. And if the answer is maybe, then it's worth trying to make that maybe into a yes and make it into a better, more impactful paper. So it really isn't a goal of, quantity. It really is a goal of quality. But, I have been fortunate to have collaborated with lots of terrific people. I think that's key as well. Not every offer for collaboration should necessarily result in a yes. I try to collaborate with people, that have a really good work ethic, that are just, sort of honest, moral people that are, writing things honestly and from a good place, and trying to advance the science and medicine. And, if it's someone that fits that description, then, generally speaking, I'm happy to work with a diverse set of types of people in terms of backgrounds or philosophies. But they really, in my book, have to meet those particular criteria. And then it's, first of all, fun to do, in addition to just hopefully serving some larger humanitarian purpose. Hopefully it's just fun. It's actually unfolding. I mean, you and I have written quite a bit, and I've always enjoyed it because, you're an engaged writer. You seem to really enjoy it. You also share a sense of purpose of trying to make the world a better place, not just doing things to do things, or just for the purposes of CV enhancement. So, I think it really helps having collaborators, in this case, co-authors, that share that type of mindset. And then it just makes it, intrinsically worthwhile, even if it ends up being something that isn't the highest impact. At least if you had some fun along the way and learned something, well, then, everybody can feel good about it.
Yeah, no, excellent answer. Is there a particular mantra that you follow? Because, this is going back to my first question, because each time I've sent you an email, no matter what the time, I've heard back fairly quickly. When I say quickly, I say it's in a matter of hours. Sometimes it has been with critical commentary or, critical feedback on a manuscript. And cardiology, academic cardiology is a small world, and, we all sort of end up knowing each other, through meetings and emails, and not Twitter and Clubhouse, what have you. And, it's a sentiment that has been shared by me about you from virtually everyone that has had the opportunity to work with you, to write with you. Like I said, you've several collaborators. So, I think from a logistical sort of, tips perspective, for someone who's listening, who needs to garner tips from you as to how to organize yourself or how to position yourself to be able to do the quality work and do all of it so well. What are some of the housekeeping rules that you follow for doing everything that you do? And I think part of it you answered when you answered about being focused and being mindful. But is there anything else?
Sure. Well, I think, it's important to sort of prioritize what you want to do in life and what's important. And that would span both personal and professional domains, because it's hard to excel at everything all at once in life. Few people can really do that if they're being honest with themselves. But I don't know that I'm necessarily a great role model for that. I must say I never said no to anything people asked me to do in terms of, work, whether it was clinical work or academic work, probably until I was a full professor. I mean, until then, I don't think I literally ever said no to anything in terms of, can you see this patient? Can you do this extra rotation clinically? Can you review this journal article? Can you contribute this book chapter? Can you help co-author or write this paper? Can you take on, this site investigator role? Can you do some research? I mean, I don't think I ever said no to any of that. But probably once I became full professor, it was maybe the first time, and not because I became full professor, I'm just saying at a later stage and age in life, I did. But if I had to just do that over again, I might have said no to more things, earlier on in life, because some of those things that I ended up saying yes to, I think were relatively low value, and it might have been better just doing other things in either professional or personal life. So I think that I'm not necessarily the best role model for how to do that, but I would say that people need to weigh honestly with themselves what is very important to them and devote time to those things. Sometimes that just happens naturally. If we really like to do things, we spend more time on it. But it can be challenging if you're a busy physician in particular. That can just take up the whole day, right? And take all your energy. But if there are things you want to do beyond clinical care, and let me say there's nothing wrong with focusing solely on clinical care. That's essentially why most of us went into medicine in the first place, to take care of patients. But for people that are wanting to do other things, then it's, I believe, important to prioritize what those other things are, whether it's things like writing papers, as we were just discussing, or hobbies that have nothing to do with medicine. But it is important to figure out what those things are, because you probably can't, just do everything. That is, you can't have 100 hobbies and do 100 other things outside the practice of clinical medicine and do them all well, at least. So, there is some need to prioritize and, say no to some things and consciously decide, okay, I'm not going to do that thing, even though I thought it might have been kind of interesting to do. So I'm not sure that's so helpful an answer, but I think sometimes, especially young physicians are their worst critic. That is, they're really hard on themselves, thinking, oh, I should have been doing this, I should have been doing that, and I'm not. And I think part of that might be, that the majority of folks at some point have trained at academic centers, and we sort of inculcate in medical students, and especially residents, and even more so fellows, that they're a failure if they're not just academically productive. And I think that's really unfortunate, because, being academically productive, by that I mean researching and writing about it, that's not for everybody. There's not always opportunities, even for everyone that's, potentially interested. And as I said a couple of minutes ago, I mean, most of us initially went into medicine to take care of patients. It's, still a noble calling. And if that's what somebody's doing 100% of their work time, that's fine. That's something to be proud of. But for people that do want to do other things, whether it's writing papers or, hosting podcasts like you are, or just doing, other sort of professional or personal or hobby type things in life, well, got to carve out the time and energy to do that.
Yes, no, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think this sort of came up when we were having a conversation, I think a few weeks ago on Clubhouse, that there's nothing wrong with doing 100%, clinical medicine. As a matter of fact, we went into medicine to become physicians who are good at taking care of patients. But I think for those who find a calling in, in, for example, clinical investigation and writing manuscripts to disseminate science, with the purpose that, like you said, earlier in the show, that, what you write may have an effect on how someone is managing a patient, 7,000 miles away. Then you've sort of affected the care of that particular individual without having even seen that person or that individual. And, at least that's how I think of research. And I'm sure that's how you think of research, because, of the kind and quality and magnitude of clinical investigation that you've pioneered and you've led. The follow-up question to this comment, Dr. Bhatt, is was that something that was a calling for you as you were going through training, or was that a conscious decision that came up when you were early career? Because you spent you spent a lot of time at the Cleveland Clinic. And what was sort of the evolutionary process for you from being a cardiovascular disease fellow to an early career attending, who also took on, roles in medical education in being the associate program director? And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you were the associate program director for the cardiovascular disease fellowship and the program director for the interventional fellowship. Before you moved to the West Roxbury VA in Boston. When did this transition or evolution happen for you?
No, you're right. I mean, I was fortunate to really hold those terrific educational roles while at Cleveland Clinic for several years. And, I got a lot out of it myself, getting to interact with fellows, learned a lot about myself, grew as a person and as an educator, I believe, and hopefully helped some fellows and residents along the way. There's a lot to be said for being in those sorts of positions, and I think it leads to lots of personal growth. It is true, I think, anytime we're in the role of educator or mentor, hopefully we're helping the person or people that we're assigned to and supposed to. But I think just for ourselves, we really grow and learn a lot. And, those were really, for me, fantastic times and experiences. I really loved my time at Cleveland Clinic. In terms of being a researcher or that aspect of my life, that certainly was fostered at Cleveland Clinic. I mean, Cleveland Clinic, as you know, being there yourself now, clinical excellence is paramount, right? Everybody there, you just got to be a great clinician, and if you're a proceduralist, a great proceduralist, that comes first. Patient care comes first, and academic pursuits typically come after that. And so, not everyone that's there is doing research, of course. And I think that's okay. I mean, that's where I learned to value different sorts of skill sets. That is, there are some folks that are full-time physicians, and these people, I think they're providing literally world-class care. That's important. In fact, nothing's more important for that patient and their family members and even their referring physician. So, once more, that's a very noble undertaking. I love that aspect of things. I loved being, trained as, and in fact, functioning as really a top-notch clinician and proceduralist. I also liked the research aspect and thought of it, at least in my brain, as complementary, because it provides an opportunity. I think this is what you were alluding to helping not just the patient in front of you, but potentially hundreds or thousands or even millions or tens of millions or even hundreds of millions of patients. So that is, to me, just along the continuum of being a physician and the opportunity of improving health, but perhaps on a larger scale. And I won't say that it's more important, because again, it all is starting with the individual, to that individual patient in your office or in your cath lab or in your OR suite. I mean, that to them is an extremely important moment in time, and that can never be underestimated. And I think the physician's role, and in fact, the whole healthcare team's role in those episodes in a patient's life, can never be overstated. But when I saw, large randomized clinical trials ongoing, I, at least again in my head, thought this is a way, I can potentially influence the care, hopefully favorably, for people all around the world, including patients that I'll never directly see or touch. My interest in research started even before that stage. My interest in clinical trials perhaps crystallized early on at Cleveland Clinic. But, even before that, I'd been involved with clinical research. I'd done a lot of hypertension research when I was at the Cornell Hypertension Center, for example, with, real giants in the field of hypertension, like Dr. Devereaux and Dr. Pickering, where we were looking at blood pressure and effects on left ventricular remodeling. And before that, I actually thought I might be a basic researcher and spent a fair amount of time doing basic research with some of the top people in the field, really, including, folks that were at that absolute top level of Nobel laureate or Nobel laureate contenders, and really enjoyed it. I think it's important, though, again, in all stages of life, people have to be honest with themselves. And I was very honest with myself, and I thought, wow, this is really great work. I love the people I'm working with. But I did note, that they were, many of them, if not all of them, very, very passionate about the science for science's sake. And in fact, Dr. Robert Weinberg, who, discovered the first oncogene, and who was my undergraduate advisor at MIT, when I was just asking him in one of those nice sort of advisee sort of conversations, just throwing random questions at him about work and life and so forth. I asked him what motivated him, and he said it was just the pure joy of science and the beauty of it and the elegance of science. And he didn't really care if what he was doing, materialized into a therapeutic that was used in humans or not. He said it'd be nice if it happened, but he would be no less satisfied if it didn't, because again, he was doing it just for the intrinsic beauty of science. And I thought that was an honest answer. I thought it was a beautiful answer, but I realized that wasn't me. That is, if I spent 50 years of my life, working in a lab and doing great science, publishing in the top journals, but it didn't actually amount to anything that influenced human health, didn't turn into a drug or a device or strategy that would actually be useful for humans with disease, that it would have, in my mind, not been a useful career that I had. So, it was really with that realization, that self-realization, that I pivoted from, perhaps otherwise having been a basic cancer researcher to being a physician and clinical researcher.
Yeah, no, excellent answer. I think, as they say, I think if, I think, to know yourself and to accept yourself is the greatest accomplishment one can have or achieve. And it could take time. I mean, it's great that it came so early for you. For me, I didn't even know I would enjoy research that much. I think when I came in, it was sort of a necessity to be competitive for cardiovascular disease fellowships, being a foreign graduate. And, I stumbled upon it out of necessity, not because I thought that I would ever enjoy it. And, now it's something which is, it's part of my DNA. I have to do it, or else I do not feel fulfilled. But, I think, it's a great learning point, lots of great learning points in that answer from you. So as a follow-up to that question, who do you think has influenced your thought process the most? I mean, of all the luminaries that you've worked with, both in basic science and in clinical medicine, who has been the biggest influence for you? Like when you were early career, like me and a lot of us were listening, who was it that you were looking up to that, okay, he or she is the kind of person I want to be?
Well, that's really a great question. And, I've been lucky. I've had really terrific mentors, along the way at every stage. I really, even going back to high school, I've got to say I had some really terrific teachers who I felt really cared about me. They cared about all the students, who were really devoted to making us better students, but also just better human beings. And, same thing in college. I was really lucky. I mentioned, to work with people at the Nobel laureate caliber, but even a bunch of folks that never won a Nobel laureate deserved it, but I didn't win it. But really a lot that I learned, and gained from those sorts of relationships. Same thing in medical school. Again, I mentioned, one of them, Dr. Devereaux, who I did research with. And, I didn't appreciate it at the time, but, the first paper I wrote with him, it was just so bad. I mean, he essentially had to, rewrite most of it, and he was so patient with it. And at the end, made it seem like I'd written this really great paper, but in fact, he'd really written it. I just, put together a bad skeleton and outline and a lot of words that needed to be replaced with red ink. Of course, that predated, people editing things with track changes on Microsoft Word. It was always, red ink, but it was just so, patient and good, and just taught me so much about clinical research and the scientific method. And that really got me sort of infected with the bug of doing clinical research. Really, it was from that point forward, I thought, okay, I want to have clinical research be part of what I do. And it was really then that I pivoted from doing basic research, and I've done more basic research, not just at the college stage of my career, but even at the medical school stage of things. I should say I did enjoy all that basic science, and I think it was worthwhile having done it. Even now, there was a lot of scientific rigor that I gained by working in basic science labs, and just a lot of knowledge that ended up being useful for subsequent research and drug and device development. But certainly Dr. Devereaux, I think, in medical school, taught me a lot about how to be not just a great doctor, but to also balance that with doing great clinical research. And, then I was lucky at Penn and in residency to have lots of great mentors. It was such a terrific place, and is such a terrific place for mentorship. But, there were folks that really got me interested in not just cardiology, but interventional cardiology. Folks, names that will be familiar to you, like Dr. Howie Herman and Dr. John Hirschfeld, that were just so encouraging about going into cardiology and even interventional cardiology, which I thought I might go into because I really liked acute coronary syndromes and MI and taking care of those types of patients. And again, I just learned so much from them about not just clinical medicine, that for sure, but just having a good bedside manner and thinking about, things like that. And, likewise, when I was at Cleveland Clinic, that it's just, in interventional cardiology, a lot of giants there, names that you would have heard of course, and other names you may not have heard of, but that were just superb operators and doctors and just well-rounded clinicians, even if they were interventionists, where they knew a lot of internal medicine and a lot of general cardiology, and were proud of that fact. But, there were also, beyond the interventionalists, I actually learned a lot of things unrelated to intervention in cardiology. When I was there, I worked a lot with the heart failure folks like, Dr. Jim Young, who was my chair of medicine there for many years, learned a lot about not just heart failure from that too, for sure, but also just about leadership and, how to run sections or departments or things like that. And, even though I was quite focused for a good chunk of my time there on interventional cardiology, really lots of great interactions with the heart failure group, other folks there too, like Dr. Randy Starling, really great teachers, really caring teachers and mentors. And preventive cardiology too. I had a great love for preventive cardiology, and much of it just started there. It was just a great preventive cardiology group, really friendly folks, really passionate about that field, in a hospital that was, somewhat procedurally focused and, focused on things that were, RVU generators, and preventive cardiology never really was that, but still they were just so devoted to the field and to trying to prevent events, ischemic events in patients. Lots of great mentors. And then, moving to Boston, it was terrific. You mentioned, my time at VA Boston, and, being chief of cardiology there, I thought was a really fun thing to do, leave an imprint, not just on an institution, but it gave me an opportunity to interact with medical students and house officers from throughout the city. My appointment was through Brigham and Women's and Harvard Medical School, but there were, Beth Israel residents rotating through. There were, BU medical students rotating through. There were, of course, Brigham and MGH house officers rotating through. So it was an opportunity to work with lots of different people from lots of different institutions from throughout Boston. So just a really wonderful experience. And, my chair of medicine there, Dr. Paul Conlon, such a nice guy, such a great example of leadership, such a supportive person. Everyone should be so fortunate to have a chair like that. And, on the Brigham side of things too, I was really lucky. I mean, getting to work with Dr. Braunwald, of course, many people from around the world dream of that sort of opportunity, but, to really get to work with him so closely, it's really been a privilege and taught me a lot about not just clinical trials, that obviously, but just again about leadership and how to be a good mentor and how to try to leave a meaningful and enduring mark and legacy in a particular field, such as cardiovascular medicine. And obviously, having the opportunity to work with folks like Dr. Libby, really, one of the premier physician scientists in the world, not just in cardiovascular medicine, but just even beyond that. Just a privilege being able to work with and learn from folks like that. So, I've been really fortunate every place I've been just to be surrounded by talented people, caring people, people that really value mentorship. But, part of it, since there's a wide variety of folks, I imagine, that listen to your podcast. And part of it is also seeking out the right mentors wherever you happen to be. Those things don't always occur naturally or accidentally. I mean, sometimes it does take effort. And, I think regardless of where one is, there's always at least somebody you can find that will be a caring individual that, even if they can't directly steer you on the right path, can connect you with others that will.
Yeah, no, I mean, your career has just been exemplary, and for many and for so many of us, I mean, I think all over the world who just look up to you, and the fact that you, I mean, there's a reason you got the Distinguished Mentor Award from the American College of Cardiology, and what I was going to say was that despite having been so accomplished. I mean, I don't think I know of any other cardiologist who has more New England Journal of Medicine or Lancet papers than you. Despite all of what you've achieved and accomplished, how approachable you are and the humility is something to aspire for. And I don't know how you do that. I really, it's a huge compliment from me. But maybe if you want to share your secret of humility, I think everybody could learn from you, about humility.
Oh, well, that's really kind of you to say. I mean, there are folks in cardiovascular medicine that are far more accomplished than me. I mean, Dr. Braunwald, obviously, Dr. Youssef, so I wouldn't overstate my stature, though that's extremely kind of you. But, in terms of humility, I think that's a really important trait that every physician should have. Every scientist as well, and certainly every physician scientist, because, medicine's really humbling. I mean, you think you understand a patient's disease trajectory or what's going on in their care, in their case, in their procedure. And next thing you know, something totally unexpected, sometimes unexpected and bad happens. And it just teaches you really don't know as much as you thought you did. So I think the best physicians always keep that mindset and are humble, always realize that there are people that know more than them in their field and certainly outside their field, but even in their field, realize that person, doesn't necessarily always have to have fancy degrees or a fancy pedigree behind them. Realize that person could be younger, not just older. So I think it's important for physicians to always, keep that mindset and never lose that, no matter, how accomplished the person, how fancy the titles, how long the CV. That fundamental never changes. But the same philosophy really should apply to scientists, whether they're basic scientists or clinical researchers, where, again, we think we understand something, but then, someone else does an experiment and we learn, okay, maybe we didn't know as much as we thought we did. So I think there as well, humility is always a good approach. And if you don't sort of adopt it proactively, it'll be forced upon you by life or by your children or by other things. So it is best to try to maintain an attitude of being humble.
Yeah, excellent. So, Dr. Bhatt, this may be a tough question for you because you just have had so many, like groundbreaking manuscripts and publications in clinical investigation. And sort of maybe my penultimate question to round up in what has been a terrific discussion. It always is for me to touch base with you and learn so much from you. Give me your top 3 manuscripts. This may be a hard one to pick because you have over 1,600 as of a few hours ago. But if I were to ask your top 3 picks, what would those 3 be?
Oh, that's a really tough question. Sometimes people ask Dr. Bronwald, what was your favorite clinical trial? Or sometimes even what was your favorite paper? And, whenever he's asked that question, and I've heard a number of people asking that question about trials, sometimes it's people he's worked with, and I think they're secretly hoping that he picks their trial. But he answers it this way, and he says, his trials are like his children. Obviously, not like the real children. He has real children and obviously values them more than a trial. But metaphorically speaking, they're like his academic children, his progeny, his intellectual offspring. And there, you really can't pick a favorite, right? I mean, for people that have children that are listening, you really love all your children equally, and you really don't have one that's favorite. And I think it's the same way with trials, and I'll say the same way with papers. I don't know they can just say a favorite just because something was published, in a high-tier journal. That doesn't de facto make it my favorite one. Every paper I've worked on, I've enjoyed, and I think assuming that it made some meaningful contribution, I'd say I'm proud of. So I don't know that I can just pick one or 2 or 3 or 10 and say, oh, those are the ones, that I really find most, impactful or important. I think everything that I've worked with in terms of papers and trials, I value equally. And you never really know when you're doing something where it'll end up. One thing, a paper I worked with, this is some years ago, with Tony Bavry and Dharam Kubani, who themselves now are quite accomplished academicians in the world of cardiology, is, we put together the first meta-analysis that showed that there was an increased risk of stent thrombosis of late and very late stent thrombosis with the first generation drug-eluting stents versus bare metal stents. At the time, I've got to say, it was met with just a lot of anger, I think. Interventional cardiologists certainly didn't want to hear that message. But it's what we thought the data showed in our meta-analysis. And subsequently, of course, it was borne out to be true that there was a small but real increased risk that, fortunately, the second and third generation DS have overcome. But, we submitted that paper to all the usual suspects in terms of tier 1 medical journals. They all rejected it. To sort of the top cardiology journals, they all rejected it. And, ultimately we submitted to American Journal of Medicine, and, the very, I'd say, knowledgeable and savvy editor there did accept it without too much of a fuss. It ended up, becoming one of the most highly cited papers at that journal. That taught me that, again, it's not really the journal impact factor that matters the most. It really is the work, its quality, its impact, its durability over time, its ability, to be replicated and confirmed that leads to its lasting significance. So, that's just a concrete example of a paper that I was really proud of. It didn't end up, in an absolute tier 1 journal, but I think it ended up, influencing the field.
Terrific. Well, Dr. Bhatt, any closing remarks and for the podcast and for the listeners?
Well, I think, ultimately life is about relationships, and we primarily talked about work relationships, but, it's important, I think, trying to foster relationships that are fulfilling ones. And when you're working with people, you really want to work with people you like and where it feels good, and, you feel like it's something meaningful, and, hopefully something that's lasting. I mean, I mentioned that last paper. That the one other aspect of that paper that was really terrific is, 2 of the folks involved with it went on to have stellar academic careers, not because of that paper, but that's just part of the whole process of, academic life and mentorship and trying to pass it on to the next generation. And, to me, this has really been a great and meaningful interview by you because, I really take a lot of pleasure in seeing how well you've done in your academic life. And it is, I think, a terrific example of how relationships really matter. I mean, we've had this sort of academic relationship that spanned multiple institutions now for several years, and that makes academic life, and I'll just say life in general, more fun and more fulfilling. It's those sort of enduring relationships that make things that otherwise may not have as much meaning, have some real significance and impact on our lives. So thank you so much for this interview. I hope your audience finds it interesting. I've sort of just been rambling on about random aspects of life, but hopefully there's some pearls of wisdom buried in there.
No, this has been phenomenal, and thank you so much for your time and your wisdom. And I couldn't agree with you more that it's at the end, it's all about relationships. And you're one person who's always been my go-to person whenever I've found myself in adversity, pain, or trouble. So thank you for being my wall, and thank you for being my support. And I look forward to cherishing this relationship that I have with you for a long, long time. Thanks, Dr. Bhatt.
Yes, likewise. Thank you so much.
We hope you enjoyed today's podcast, produced by Radcliffe Cardiology in association with makeadent.org. We aim to bring you a new angle of all things cardiology every second week. Review us on your favourite podcast app, or send your comments or questions to podcast@radcliffe-group.com. To view the series, head to radcliffecardiology.com/podcasts/Parallax. Thanks for listening.